You introduce the topic, bring out the expert. That's what these press house, press house. Now I sound like press house briefing. If I were Donald Trump, I would say,
like, no, it's not a press house.
Briefings, and they would say, did you mean White House press briefings? No. Excuse me. No.
I was being cute. I have a new building. It's called the press house.
I was being cute.
And there's somebody feverishly changing all of it on the White House website to press house briefings.
Right. And so people have been coming back at us saying, like, do you regret saying what you said on Friday? No, I don't. I regret nothing. Because people were going out there saying, I think it was Governor Whitmer from Michigan saying, you absolutely should not drink Lysol. Find me a quote even remotely close to Donald Trump saying you need to drink Lysol. No, he didn't say that. What the media went forward with, what they used was completely, it was media malpractice. It was journalistic malpractice. It's totally taken out of context. That being said, as we said on Friday, Donald Trump sometimes speaks like an idiot.
Yeah. Yes.
And for him to be defended by his supporters, saying the media has taken this out of context, which granted might have been a misspeak, he would rather lie and say, I was being sarcastic than just own up that he made a mistake. The new Israeli global study shows that this is something that's been across the board, and they can't necessarily explain it, that there's a rapid increase with coronavirus. It peaks in the 6th week, and then it declines in the 8th week, regardless of lockdown policies. And you've heard us talk about this quite a bit, because if you look at Sweden, they're not worse off. For example, they had no lockdown. And there's a reasonable difference between the two where you should be able to split the difference, where you either lock down everything and you quarantine the healthy, which makes no sense. Historically, you don't quarantine the healthy, you quarantine the sick.
Right, exactly.
Then there's the other approach of Sweden where you don't do anything and you leave all schools open. You don't really change the way of life a whole bunch. I think there's a middle ground, which is you quarantine the sick, you quarantine the vulnerable, and you allow the healthy to go forward.
Right.
Here's something else that's pretty interesting. William Briggs, he actually wrote that flu, and we talked about this, flu pneumonia deaths are being misclassified as coronavirus deaths. And here's something that's really telling. We've talked about this, how all of a sudden flu deaths went to zero.
Right.
Right, just disappeared.
Miraculously
went to zero. But then a lot of people said, well, maybe that was because of social distancing. And you heard me say, hold on a second, this is happening before social distancing, in the sense that those flu deaths and pneumonia deaths went down in February or early March. Okay, so that would have been before social distancing, even if it went all the way through mid-April. Social distancing wouldn't have really kicked in until about now, just to be clear. But the all-cause mortality death rate is significantly lower this year than last year. Yes, and this is going back to January. So what does that mean for a second? That means it's been trending down since January, long before lockdowns began. And it's only been declining more. I think we can bring this up here. This is from the William Briggs study. So that means all-cause mortality. What would that mean? That would mean flu, pneumonia, heart attack, stroke, cancer. All-cause mortality is lower. Why? Because of any of those other comorbidities in any other year, which would be this is a stroke death. This is a heart attack death. This is a death due to complications with diabetes. This is a death due to complications with hypertension, are all being listed as COVID deaths, just like all flu and pneumonia deaths are being listed as COVID deaths. It doesn't make any sense that this year our overall mortality rate is significantly lower, and it is significantly lower across the board on the all-cause mortality rate, unless, like we saw in Pennsylvania, where they took just 200 COVID deaths off the books. Like you saw in New York on the flip side, where they added 3,700 coronavirus deaths without being tested, by the way. They just assumed that it was present. And I understand there's some complications here where, if someone has cancer and they're going through chemo and they're doing okay, and then they get the flu, well, maybe the flu did kill them. But there is a split, those, right? It's not all of them will go on the register, what will be registered as a flu death. Typically, you go, well, hold on a second. What was the more severe condition? What was the condition that was more likely to kill someone? Is it the chemo? Is it the fact that this person has stage 4 melanoma, or the fact that this person has the flu? No, what was going to kill them inevitably was a cancer. So they look at those. Our death rates in this country aren't all that accurate. And when you look at these numbers now that show us, okay, coronavirus peaks at 6 weeks and goes down by 8 weeks, regardless of containment, and then you look at the all-cause mortality rate being lower, that is something that should concern a lot of people, because I think these books, I'm not a doctor. I want to be very, very clear here, not offering medical advice, but the books are covered. Can we bring that up again real quick? That's the overlay that, more patients, hospitals get paid more if patients are listed as COVID-19 on ventilators. That's right, specifically on ventilators right now.
Oh, wow, yeah.
And none of these, what was the US, what is it, USNS Comfort? USS Comfort?
USS Comfort.
USS Comfort.
Oh, yes.
They just left, the ship left New York. Bye-bye. They weren't even close to capacity with their beds. Almost all of these hospitals that have been built up, they haven't been used at all. right? Hospitals right now are furloughing and laying off workers. They're not full. They're not filled to capacity. So this whole flatten the curve, well, we did it. We may have flattened a curve that wasn't really going to happen because now we've destroyed an entire industry of healthcare workers. And unfortunately, you do have to go to the doctors who are actually treating patients. Listen, I'm not disrespecting Dr. Fauci at all. I understand. He hasn't seen a patient in 20 years. And the theoretical and the practical, what happens in the real world, are very different things. And when you look at doctors who are actually treating patients right now on a grand scale, there does seem to be a chasm between doctors who are now don't just take doctors in Lenox Hill, don't just take doctors in New York City, but doctors even in California, doctors in Wyoming, doctors in Texas. If you take what they are seeing and what is going on in their hospitals and compare it to the projections that you saw from the World Health Organization or what Dr. Fauci said was undeniable. Here's the thing, if you look at there is no denying right now, okay? Here's something about which there can be no disagreement. It wouldn't have been humanly possible for the United States to have 2.5 million deaths. It's not possible. It's not possible understanding the death rates that we understand now. When the left tries to say, hey, they're just like the climate deniers, go, you know what? Yep. The people who said there's no way we're going to have 2.5 million dead in the United States, there's no way, no how. I want you to remember that and go, he's the same guy who's saying that the Kyoto Protocol won't curb emissions because we shouldn't trust China. Yep, I'm that denier.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm that guy. Put me in that category. Yep, I said no way 2.5 million deaths. No way 5 to 7% death rate. It's horseshit. I'm the same guy saying Montreal Agreement, Kyoto Protocol. Now it's the Paris Accord. No, sorry. Kyoto Protocol, Paris Accord. Yep, I'm the same denier. Now, just like with COVID, I didn't say it was a hoax. I was saying this is something that needs to be dealt with appropriately. There needs to be the appropriate scale in relation to the threat. That is exactly what we are saying about climate change. There needs to be an equal and appropriate response to the scale of the threat. And shutting down the world economy, you know how difficult this has been, by the way? You know how difficult this has been right now for everyone here? We talk about the economy shutting it down. What do you think would happen if neo-environmentalists had their way globally and these same people like AOC are saying, I think it's a great thing that oil is at a net negative. If these people had their way, what you're experiencing right now is actually child's play compared to what they would experience in the third world with the Green New Deal or the Kyoto Protocol actually being signed. Sorry, my bad, Paris Accord. I keep forgetting
It just keeps changing names.
Let alone in the new world. You think that you've been thrust out into the cold that AOC knows. You cannot imagine what would happen. So think. Coronavirus, the leftist response, what happened to the economy, now apply that to the entire globe. That is the Paris Agreement. So, yep, put us all in the same boat.